Yeah, he sort of implied like, you guys are making all this money off League of Legends and then investing it in other teams. And basically, the reason why it was kind of like a gangster letter is because the letter was sort of like, actually, even the most successful team, we're actually losing money and we're definitely not putting it into other games. Like, what money are you talking about?
That's smart, but I tell my coaching staff, I want to win. So unless their expectations are winning, I'm not sure the future is so bright.
And then you have to.
That explains why so many people have been cut. Yeah, that explains why there's so many people have been through the door. Fair enough. Yeah, eventually you'll find them. Just keep filtering through.
Yeah, keep filtering through.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, TSM had to start with Loco, and then in many ways,
and win two splits.
Yeah, you did a great job. What they learned was how to win the LCS, and then they were like, actually, now we want to win Worlds, so it's been real, Loco. You can move on and find your career elsewhere. We'll all mutually agree.
Doran, how many times have TSM made it out of groups without me?
0 times, mate.
They came close the other year, but I think we stopped them.
Oh yeah, you guys did. Thanks, Ben, for keeping my legacy alive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go.
Exactly. Okay, so I've just realised I even made a mistake in the intro there because technically you didn't buy the Renegades team. That became Envious. You bought the Challenger team, which was Misfits. Yes, which then became obviously later on. People remember that team became an LCS team in the EU LCS. Right. So let's start there then. Even though I'll just do this to flame Loco. Like Loco did start with like, how did Misfits start? Well, like technically Loco, it wasn't actually Misfits, like it wasn't Ben's team initially. So that's he can't tell you that. But here's the real question: why did you choose to buy a European challenger team? Like as an outsider, to give context, this isn't. If I was going to tell someone a couple of years ago in a similar fashion about a team, and they said, I'm willing to invest money and I want a proper team going forwards, I would probably not say get an EU challenger team. I'd say something like maybe get the best NA challenger team because, the parlay could be so big if you get into NALCS and then World stuff. Going to the EU route at that point in time, it's kind of risky, right?
Yeah, definitely risky. But I think that if you actually look at the player base numbers for Europe, it's larger than North America. I think that ultimately the viewership can be larger in Europe, except you have fragmented languages. However, the real story is, I've been a fan of League of Legends for many years. Never been a great player, but always loved watching the best players play. And what happened, as you know, was the whole Renegades fiasco, and I think it was TDK and one other team that was forced to sell. And I literally was just simply a fan of the sport, and I cold emailed Brandon Beck. I guessed, wasn't a hard guess, but I guessed the syntax of Riot Games' email. I sent him a cold email saying, hey.
Don't give anyone any ideas because I think a few people could guess it right now. Do not email Brandon Beck, people who are watching this show. Don't do it.
But I literally emailed Brandon Beck, and the guy was in China, and he forwarded my email over to Waylon. Waylon Roselle, who's a co-head of esports. He then forwarded my email to Hunter Lee, who is now at Golden Guardians, but was then at Riot Games. And Hunter was gracious enough to introduce me to the teams that were selling. And then from there, it sort of took off. And the opportunity in front of us was actually either to buy what was then Renegades' North American LCS team, or to actually go for the Challenger Series qualifying team over in Europe.
So you had the choice and you went with the European one. Okay.
We did. And we thought at that point, remember, it's easy now to look back and say, could have done this or should have done that. But when you go back 2.5, 3 years ago, as much as we've grown as an industry in that time, it still was super speculative. If you think it's speculative now, 3 years ago, it was even more speculative. So we thought the more conservative approach was to go with the EU team, and ultimately it was an amazing decision. We love the European market. It's a bigger player base. We think a bigger overall market. I grew up. Americans love consoles. You have a lot more PC gamers outside of America than you do within America proportionately, and League is obviously a pure PC play. So that was really it. We speaking for weeks and weeks and weeks, because really what happened was they had this Challenger Series qualifying team that had not even yet qualified. So they had the contracts for people like Dreams, Yuki, Selfie, Alfari, and Wisdom, I believe, was then the jungler of the team.
Okay.
And they qualified, and we acquired it like 3 days before Challenger Series started. We brought in Hansama and Ignar within the first week, and we got promoted in our first split.
Okay. No, it's funny when you say then like how speculative it was back then, because one of the things I think is funny is because of how much investment has come in like exponentially every year, it feels like, and especially obviously things like the Overwatch League, like helping play a part and like leveraging the whole system up. Like when you went back in the day, people always used to make out like every one of those team owners who sold a slot for like, and it always used to be like the number of quote was always $1 million. If you remember, just to make it like a sexy number, you know, I'm sure they were always like higher or lower. But when people used to quote that, they always used to quote it as though like, you know, look at this, he's wrecked them. He sold it for $1 million. Like, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to get a team, get it in LCS, sell right away, because, you know, you'll never make any money back off that. Like, if I could go back in time now, I would get like 10 people I know in business, and I'd just tell them all, like, listen, you're getting a team, you're getting a team, you're getting a team. Like, just trust me on this. We're all getting teams, because they're going to be worth a lot more than $1 million in like 3 years from now. It's ridiculous, isn't it, how much has gone up?
Yeah, no, look, I firmly believe that teams are still the best vehicle for asset appreciation. I mean, not to get like sort of crazy into it, but look, yeah, sure, Activision, Tencent, these are all public companies, but in terms of an ROI on an investment, are you going to go 10x or 15x on that money? An investment, probably not. And by the way, running and operating and fielding teams is fucking a lot of fun. So teams for me was always the play to go. And we've been quite successful, and I've been loving every minute of it.
Okay. Like, Loco, you must have something to say on that topic, because obviously with all the orgs you've been involved in, okay, I'll give you an example. So most people are going to think of Golden Guardians, and even though they have the Golden State Warriors backing, because they look at the lineup when you first were the coach, and it didn't look like a very good lineup. It looked like one where, at least from the outside, people thought, oh, they just got like cheaper players, you know, and they didn't get a good squad. And then people look at where the team placed, and they go, well, it wasn't one of the top teams. I'm just going to go ahead and guess, ballpark, the amount of money invested into Golden Guardians in Season 8 was ridiculous compared to any TSM team in the past, and, you know, any of the ones you coached, right?
Yeah, because due to salary inflation, definitely. But you have to compare it. Like, TSM back then paid the most for their players. So we were the #1 spending team as an org in 2014, 2015. So Golden Guardians, while they weren't the #1 spending org, I would probably put them somewhere like 7th or 8th most spending.
Okay.
The numbers were just so much higher, just the pure numbers at Golden Guardians. But I do think everything is a little relative. Like, especially when you compare like 2014 teams to 2018 teams.
No, that I just mean in the sense of like that's how much it's expanded. That the Golden Guardians obviously isn't the #1 now, but even then it would dwarf what TSM was in 2014, and obviously TSM was always the team that people thought had all the money, even though that wasn't always entirely accurate, but they certainly were always up there.
I'll give you a comparison. The highest player on Golden Guardians salary could cover all the salary on the 2014 TSM roster.
That makes sense.
Okay. What about this though, Ben? I just thought of a topic actually I'd like just to very briefly to touch on, which is when you were saying there about the way the valuations got up, and the way actually probably the most interesting part is the real paradigm shift was, as you say, how people thought of what the valuation should be. Because obviously the valuation at the moment isn't literally based on like return on the investment and actual revenue that people make. It's based on basically what someone will pay for the org, what someone's willing to pay for it, what they think it's worth now and in the future, and whether they're willing to let an org go. So I saw an article, I don't know if you saw it recently, I forget the publication, it might have been the Esports Observer, where they argued that you should actually think of esports organizations as more akin to like tech startups and the way the valuation goes on those, as opposed to actually, you know,
pure sports
teams or whatever. Yeah, because obviously, you know, the sports team, you know all the revenue and all those sorts of numbers, and you can really, you can gauge it all, right?
Yeah, what do you think? I think about it similarly, that there of our company that should be looked at as a sports play, and then there's aspects of the company that should be looked at more from like a media company lens. And I think somewhere between the two is the blended, where I think really the valuations and how things should be, quote, valued at. But yeah, it's definitely not a pure sports play. in the traditional sports sense. You can't just take those metrics and apply it to esports teams. It's not the same thing.
Sure. Especially because, yeah, like as you say, there's so many additional factors. Like if you're buying an NHL franchise, the NHL isn't going to go up 50% viewership in the next 2 years. Like, you know, they kind of know where their sports at. They know what the revenue lines are. Everything's pretty well tapped out. You know, they've done a very good job as it's been around so long. If you buy an esports org, as I alluded to before, even if it's one now, even if it's a big one, for all you know, there could be a new game that comes out in 2 weeks that becomes the next big game that if you got into early, because you're a big org, like all these things just spiral up in terms of how you value all these things, don't they? So,
yeah. It's exactly right. It's a blend between tech, media, and sports.
Okay.
Wait, Doran.
So,
one thing I do have to mention. So you think I know Ben through like Gorilla and like that whole Misfit thing, but I know Ben through something completely else that you probably don't know.
I don't even know you know him through Gorilla, mate. Like, I mean, I know you assume I think that you know everyone in Korea. I think you know about 2 people in Korea, and then they're just like, oh, fucking Locodoco's calling again. I was on a team with him 7 years ago. When does this end? But like,
Loco knows everyone.
Yeah,
I'm sure he does.
Do you know the team before Golden Guardians that I coached, Doran?
Some shit team called TSM or something, wasn't it?
No,
no, you mean Gold Coin United, obviously. Yeah. Okay.
So
it's too easy. It just sets them up, doesn't it?
So owner of GCU is a father and son combo, Jake and Jimmy Kuhn, and they're both part of Misfits now. And that's how I know Ben. I know Ben through Jake, my previous owner, and yeah, like that's how like I ended up like helping Misfits a little. So what does
Jake is now in Berlin, heading up our operations out in Europe.
Yeah. So like that's the connection. That's how I actually knew Ben. And yeah, fun fact, I guess.
Okay. Right. Well, one thing that we have to dive into then, because you slightly alluded to it before when you said that actually you did have the option. Did you want to buy the Renegades League of Legends team, which became Envious, obviously, or did you want to get the Challenger team, which, as you say, hadn't even qualified at this point in time, and more importantly, didn't have some of the key players that obviously ended up being essential to Misfits having the success people know of them having since. So the obvious question there is, beyond, you know, which team you thought would do better or which you thought was the best, why go to EU? Because most people would say, I mean, until franchising now, basically, you even saw orgs who were very successful who were like, we can't make money in Europe. Like, this is a really tough situation to be in. I mean, wasn't your org, in fact, one of the ones that, unless I'm mistaken, before franchising in NA, weren't you one of the orgs that applied to be an NA franchise?
Yeah, well, I got to be careful with all of
all right, what about this? There was a report.
There was a
published.
report. Yeah,
yes.
Look,
there we go.
there was a report published about that, but I will tell you that us, along with the other teams that were part of that report, the timing of that report came out before any information was made available to us as team owners regarding anything that was going on within Europe, right? So clearly North America franchised a year before Europe did, and at the time of that report, if you look at what was either publicly or privately known about what was going on in Europe, the NA franchising predates any of that process. So I think that you know, if the reports were to be true, would factor into part of that decision. I think part of one of the original decisions NA was a couple things. You alluded to just the pure roster play in North America. If I recall, I think they had like Ninja, Zaraf, I forget the couple of the players that they had.
It's like Freeze and Maria, and it was like a very mixed lineup, if people remember.
Yeah, Hakuyo, I think, was on that roster originally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I forget some of the other players. And to be honest, we didn't have as much confidence in that roster as we did in the roster that they had on the Challenger Series qualifying team. I think we also didn't know, to be honest, a lot of what we were doing. So from a team perspective, entering this world, we had no idea what it was like working with Riot, for example. And so all of those factors combined, it just made so much more sense to go to Europe. And we've been able to navigate, you know, most of the complexities of Europe. We just opened up like an arena in Berlin. So we love the market and are thrilled to still be there.
Right. Most people know the basic genesis of the public part of how franchising came to NALCS, which is that letter that famously was written by like Reginald and a bunch of the teams, where they responded to what I think it was Mark Merrill, right? I think it was Tryndamere who said the comment where like
Make
where
your money or something.
Yeah, he sort of implied like, you guys are making all this money off League of Legends and then investing it in other teams. And basically, the reason why it was kind of like a gangster letter is because the letter was sort of like, actually, even the most successful team, we're actually losing money and we're definitely not putting it into other games. Like, what money are you talking about? Like, we've already tapped out the sponsorship. You guys, there's no more opportunity at the moment to build it bigger, and the league itself is in this sort of plateaued place. So that was, in theory, what people saw from the outside as the impetus to have franchising. And if people notice, since franchising came in NA, there've been a lot less complaints, a lot less public things said by any orgs. And whether or not they're happy or not, they're certainly not like so upset that they're going to publicly come out in this way. Now, a similar thing obviously happened in Europe. I mean, it was initially started by H2K, where they came out with their statement saying you couldn't make money. But as I say, it's not a good look if like Fnatic and G2 and these teams are applying saying, we'll just leave Europe and go to NA. Like that as an outsider, again, looks like EU LCS isn't in a good spot if it doesn't have franchising. Why is franchising necessary for the European market? Like what couldn't you do in the EU LCS that people want to be able to do with franchising? What does it open up?
Well, I think that franchising in general, I think part of the reason why at least we got into the industry and wanted to get into League of Legends was to the ability to see, the upside together with Riot and with the players. So you had this notion where, at least if you were to believe H2K's letter, or take their POV for a second, where they were saying that Riot was making a lot of money, players were making a lot of money, but they as a team were starving. I would say that there were a lot of reasons why they themselves were starving, and sponsorships or something was not working out, or this, that, and the other. But I think that...
Looks like Doran disconnected for a sec.
Oh, I'm back.
Okay.
There he is.
Oh, never mind. Sadly, that's the downside, unfortunately, Loco, of Discord. When it crashes, it just closes itself and reconnects. So anyway, keep going, mate. I heard it up until the last part.
Yeah, I think we're still missing your video. There we go.
There we go.
So basically, look, I think that our thesis here is that us as teams, we want a piece of the pie, right? Just as much as players do and as Riot do. And I think what the franchise process did is it formalized that. So if the pie is zero, which it's not, then okay, then we all know that what we're getting into is a $0 or euro a year thing. It's not zero, it's significantly, obviously, higher than that. So I think what the franchising process did, at least from my perspective, was really formalize the relationship between that LRP, the league revenue pool. So it takes away the notion that, hey, Riot's taking in all of this money, and in fact now actually, the teams and the players and Riot are all sharing. I think the other major benefit that we've seen, at least in Europe, I don't know everything that's going on within North America, is there's actually like a real tangible shift in the way that Riot is involving us teams within so many of the different aspects behind the scenes. So when we're talking about biz dev meetings, where the people that are fully responsible for monetizing the LCS and bringing in partners and sponsors are meeting with us and coming and asking us for ideas and for leveraging relationships and how we feel about some of their ideas. And you see Romain, that was just hired to be part of that team. This guy, I probably got 10 emails from him saying, hey, please let me know. I want to meet with you guys. I want to have a meal. I want to learn from you. What are your pain points and push points that we can help from? So you're seeing a real shift in how we are treated. Not to say we were treated poorly before, but I think that before franchising there was definitely some sort of wall between Riot keeps everything close to the vest, and they release rules and rulings and this, that, and the other without any insight or foresight given to teams and players. And I think that's totally changed, at least within the first 6 weeks or however long it's been since franchising has been announced. We've seen a total shift, which has been really great.
Okay. Right. I will say this, Loco, you have to be very careful when we're on the topic of franchising. As you saw when I even asked him if he applied to join the NLCS, because literally he has signed NDAs, etc. And other things, it just would not benefit you whatsoever to reveal. Like there's no point saying I could have done this in some sense. That's why you have to be very careful with the language. So what do you want to talk about in terms of the franchising part, Loco? What do you think is interesting?
What I think is interesting. Well, I want to ask if he had any kind of, decision making on naming it LEC. Like it's such because it could have just been LCE, right? League of Legends Championship Europe. Like why they went with
pretty good, right?
LEC for like to set up for all the jokes and stuff. So that one's really weird.
I'm not even joking. Like this, like people are going to think that I copied this because this was a joke a lot of people said all over, like in social media. But no joke. The second I saw just like LEC and read it, because obviously you see if you see a word and it has a vowel in, you tend to read it as a word, not an acronym, right? The second I saw it was like LEC, I just literally thought that moment in Rick and Morty where he has that like ringtone that's like my balls. Like that's like the first thing that went in my mind. I was like, this is. I know that's purely accidental. They can't know that, but that's not a great association from step one.
Yeah. So for that, I would like to absolve our ability. Although I do actually like it. I love the logo. I think the animation of the crown sort of turning is really fun. I think that process actually took a long time, and so that predated anything regarding franchising. So when they did that, they showed it to us, and they showed us a lot of the different concepts. And I think all the teams ate it up. So
no one at the table was like, guys, people are gonna be like, lick my balls or like lick anything. Like, why don't we just do LCE instead? No one at the table had like an idea to stand up and be like, this is gonna be bad.
No. It didn't come to my mind.
Okay. All right. Another thing I have to ask is, so you guys are somewhat based in Florida, like you guys, Florida Mayhems, investment from Miami Heat, like, so there's a very...
It's technically Florida and Orlando.
Okay.
It is Florida, Miami, Orlando.
Yes, yeah. Miami, Orlando, that's it.
Although we have basically the entire state. We go from as far down the Keys all the way up through Gainesville. I don't know if Gainesville's where the University of Florida is, Jacksonville. Okay. So we have essentially the entire state. We also have the Bahamas, but yeah, we have
not the hottest property in esports at the moment. But listen, I'm pulling for you. I hope it makes it one day, mate. I'd like there to be events in the Bahamas. A lot of let's go for Worlds there. Let's have a lot of press conferences there. Sounds like a good spot to me.
Well, part of the thinking there was the owners of the Heat own Carnival. Well, Carnival Cruise Lines is a public company, but they're people behind Carnival Cruise Lines, and Nassau is a really huge cruise port. So the thought is potentially to have some Overwatch League home games at Nassau, at Atlantis, for example, could be actually kind of really fun, I think. So that's why we put that in.
If the show ever gets big enough, Loco, we'll do like a live show on a cruise where people pay like $10K to join the cruise, and then they get like a week of cruise, and then they have like a show every night. Everyone will be sick from like the seafood buffet or something. It'll be mad cringy, but that's how when we really need to sort of start raking in the money, and we're just done with all the esports. We'll do that. We'll take it on the road or on the seas.
Yeah.
But Loco, to answer your question, I don't view Florida company. I view us as like a global business, a global esports company that has team based in Berlin, and we have a huge infrastructure in Berlin, built out a really large office with full content team, full social media, video editors, post motion graphics editors, social media creators. We've got a full team of probably 10 people just in operational staff, not even related to team operations. So I view us as a global company, just like Apple may be headquartered in California, but they have huge operations at multiple places around the world.
Okay.
Doesn't it kind of muddy your identity? Because most teams are like, we're an LA team, like all our teams are in LA, like we're the LA
because what Overwatch League did with the branding sort of allows us to have two different identities, kind of like the Knicks, the New York Knicks own the Knicks, the Rangers, the Liberty. They own a bunch of different teams, and maybe they're all New York, but they're all distinct brands.
Yeah.
So I don't see much issue there.
Okay.
Right
At
now,
least from us.
So Loco wanted us to talk about some of the players who've been on the Misfits EULCS team, right? And obviously, when he just writes it down, he just wants to know something like Loco, when he writes down the topic list, is just like a nice guy, he just goes, why did you import Koreans, or what happened there? Like, this is the way it gets pushed through my prism, though. So I'm just going to start like this, Ben. Right, I'll tell you straight up as a disclaimer. I'll give you a little bit before I throw you in the fire. Okay, I'm kind of a true believer, right? Whenever someone's been a truly great player, if I hear that they're getting a chance again, so I'll give you an example. Okay, someone who just retired, Alex Ich. If Alex Ich ever got announced to a team, like at least no matter what form he was in before he was on that team, at least 1% of me pulled so hard for him to really make it, because like I used to be such a big fan of his. I thought he was an amazing player, and so I want to believe that he could be a great player again. But if someone actually had, I mean, make either ridiculous scenario, like gun to my head, does it work? Or they say like, bet $1 million of your own dollars on it. I'm going to go ahead and say the cynical side of me had come out and go, I'm going to go, hell no. Like, these guys are washed up as hell. Like, get me out of here. So here's the real question for you, right? Who the hell convinced you in like, it must have been like season 7, was it? That Cacao was a player worth paying to come and play in Europe. Again, Europe, not the LCK, not an LCK, European LCS. Who convinced you that Cacao would be raised from the dead 3 years after he passed away as a top player? Like, this was you must have had a lot of hope in this.
What I did was I just listened to his laugh on repeat to get me amped up. Look, I think that for us, part of the thing with getting Cacao was to try to make a splash from a branding perspective as well. So it was not just a pure competitive play as much as I would love to say that I thought that he would be the best jungler. Obviously, his history was one of the best in history, his experience there. But I think part of that play was to show to people that we're here to build a brand. Cacao had a huge name. We felt as a coaching staff that we could harness his play. Ultimately, I think where we failed him was that we were not able to get his communication skills up to speed as quickly as we thought we could. We had really great success with Ignar learning English, and that translated into really good wins for us, both on the Rift and out. And with Cacao, we could never really just get him over. But he is, a great personality, a great bubbly guy, fun to be around, and really smart about the game. And I think we just got him maybe mechanically. He was not as fine-tuned as he used to be.
Okay. Right, Loco, if you're going to insert yourself in all this stuff, like, oh yeah, I recommended all these guys, and like I used to work with them. What, you were just silent on this way, or were you just like, oh no, pick up my friend who is Korean, he is still good.
To be fair, like with Cacao, like when he went to China, got him when he left China. The thought there that we had done with our scouting was that basically he was not on a great team in China. And
I think he was in like the LSPL even. I don't think he was in the LPL at the time, right?
That's right. So he was basically on a not so good team in China, and that he still had it, and would be able to convert and do. And by the way, there were moments where he played actually really well for us. I believe that. I think our first split with him, where we had Power of Evil, Ignar, Cacao, Hansama, and Alfari, we got 4th place, I think, in the first split, where we were in Germany. I remember Tristan was the home crowd favorite. So it wasn't like we played really poorly, right? But ultimately, I think that we couldn't, we felt that we weren't going to be able to get to work, say, with him. And so that was the decision we made to go buy Maxler from Rockhat at the time.
Okay. Loco, when you actually recommend people, it doesn't have to be Cacao, but when you recommend friends of yours or people who are Korean players, are you also like reasonable with that? Like, do you give like reasonable expectations?
I try to be as reasonable as possible, and most of the time I recommend against importing Koreans because there's so many things you need to be able to import a Korean properly, like translator, culture fit, fit with the players, like playstyle fit with the coaching staff. So I think it's really dangerous to push people to import Koreans when they're not prepped for it. And one thing I do have to commend Misfits for is when they got Gorilla, like they were so willing to accommodate, like we'll get a Korean assistant coach, like we'll make sure we have Koreans in the house, like we'll get a translator. Like they weren't just like, okay, we're going to pick up Gorilla and he's just going to fit within the team. Like they knew like the pieces required to like make Gorilla work. So
not only that, we've learned a lot too. So when we had Ignar, there were moments in 2017 when we went to Worlds towards the end of the season where Ignar got really homesick, and it was very much negatively impacting not just his play on stage, but his scrims. Like imagine, going to work and you're not happy in general in life. You're not going to want to work, right? You're going to be down and not happy with what you're doing, and you don't want to sit there playing League of Legends when you're thinking about family from home. And so what I said to him was like, his sister was super active on social media. I know it was a big support piece for him. I was like, listen, I want to fly your sister and your mom over to Berlin. I'll put them up for a week. We flew them out. We put them up. They saw him. When they came, they actually arrived at the studio, I think was the first time that he saw them when they came into Berlin. And if you go ask Ignar and you ask the team about what were one of the reasons why that team did so well was flying out Ignar's parents. Ignar's mom and sister. I don't know if anyone watches Survivor, but like the hometown when they come on Survivor and their family, they haven't seen their family and they bring their relative. I always cry. But they bring out their relatives and the players are like, oh my God, that emotional uplift from just seeing your parent was really important to them, and the same thing for Ignar. So what I said to Gorilla was the same thing. I preempted it. I was like, dude, I'm gonna put this in your contract. I want to fly out whoever you want a couple times a year so that you can get a little bit of a taste of home from your family on a regular basis, so that really can help stave off some of the effects of being away from your friends and family for so long.
Yeah. I mean, importing Koreans isn't easy. Importing Koreans and having them function on your team isn't easy. And yeah, it takes a lot of work. And I feel like a lot of teams in Overwatch, a lot of teams in NALCS, EULCS don't understand that. And like you get a lot of like really bad situations. Like most notably, off the top of my head, I can remember is like Piglet on Team Liquid, like throughout the years, wasn't the greatest in terms of Piglet or for Team Liquid, and also Nuclear and Che for H2K.
Dude, I think you can go the other way. Like it'd take less time to list the Koreans that actually were really good and it all worked out. Like it's actually a pretty small list, because even some of the ones that had like a split that was good, not many of them stuck around. Like they were in the same teams or they got passed off somewhere else. So along those lines, then Ben. An obvious question there is, like you said, bigger player base in Europe, as your team in fact proved. There are loads of players in Challenger who, if you can sort of like weed through them and you have the right talent scout, you might have like actually like one of the best players at his role once you get to the LCS, if you can get that player. So people would say, why import Koreans at all? Like, especially at that point in time, this isn't like franchising now where, it makes sense to go for like a Gorilla type player because he's a legendary player. You can get like a truly world-class player. When you're having to gamble on Koreans, then why not just gamble on a European player?
You mean in this off-season's case?
No, a couple of years ago when he first.
When we brought in Ignar Dreams, actually we had Dreams, who was an import at that time as well. I think for us back then it was trying to just get the best possible player. The focus of that initial Challenger Series run was to get the team promoted. It wasn't to stay in Challenger Series. When we did Challenger Series again a year later, we had that team promoted, and on that we went much more into trying to grow local players. So we had again Yuki, we had Llama Bear, we had Pride Stalker, who went on to join Schalke the next season. Dreams, Yuki, and Cosq. Cosq stayed on with Mysterious Monkeys, and I'm not sure where he is now. But when we did it again, we did have on regional growth. But that initial season, man, it was how do we get this team promoted? And we felt at the time Ignar, who I believe tried out for TSM and KT that offseason, I'm a little bit murky, and did not make either of those teams, happened to still be available a week before the season started, and we made the quick decision to bring him in.
Wait a minute. So he actually got turned down by TSM, and then you guys rocked TSM out of Worlds and just ruined their dreams completely.
When they, what is it?
That's even better. That's even better. That's like
I actually didn't even think of that. You just said that.
By the way, that moment alone had to have been unreal, right? Just knocking TSM out and just realizing, like, not only have you wrecked TSM, but I remember obviously like a legendary lineup they had, but also there's a part, like, listen, even if you don't hate TSM, most people don't, there's still a part of you that, like, it is still kind of fun to trigger people like that, where they're just going to go mad, right?
Of course. And, Andy, I love beating Andy as can. And so beating TSM was really, I mean, first of all, everyone says like just being there is great. Look, obviously just being there is great, but my God, getting out of groups, getting to SKT, which is just a proud, double-edged memory in my mind.
Sure.
But yeah, beating TSM and getting out of groups where everyone thought we would not was really awesome.
So you seem someone that is like very, very player friendly and player focused. How do you find the balance between like supporting a player and spoiling a player? I find it incredibly hard in esports, like to find a good balance between like giving a player what they want and keeping them happy versus like also spoiling them, like flying family members over, like great salary. And yeah, it seems like you're the type of person to support players very heavily. And Misfits seems like a great org for players, and oftentimes like that can be overused by players, and it can turn out negative in terms of like being like spoiling them. So I'm really curious how you find a good balance between like actually supporting a player and not spoiling them in the process.
Look, I think that it's kind of like parenting. I have a 4.5-year-old kid and an 11-month-old girl, but taking the 4.5-year-old, there's just you just know, right? It's like I'm very much a compassionate owner and manager, I would say, not just of the players, but of the employees that we have. But at the same time, I expect a lot of people. So if you have a player who is constantly needing or asking things or what you might consider too much pampering, this, that, and the other, if they are performing and acting professional in return, I'll always continue to be more kind than firm. But if you have a player who is not being professional, then at that point, I'm able to turn the other way and be more forceful. But honestly, I think that for me, for example, all of our player contracts across every single sport game title that we have has a streaming minimum in it, for example, and there's always a reduction that I'm entitled to take in their salary for them not meeting their minimum hours streamed. We've had 100+ players come through our org, right. And I've never once reduced or fined a player for not meeting minimum streaming hours when there would be teams out there and orgs out there that would be
so I'm amazed at that. Like that's one of the that's that one exact topic you've just named there, of a clause in a contract that says you will stream X hours per month and like this amount of your salary is dependent upon that. That is probably the biggest disconnect I've seen between pro players and esports over the streaming age. And it looks like I thought you'd like that. And the orgs themselves, because players, for some reason, even though they sign the contract because they want the most money, they want the big salary amounts, they sign it. And even though they see that clause, and you could even tell them, you are aware that you have to meet this clause to get this part of the contract, they still, at the end of the day, think that even if, listen, I had a really hard month last month, I couldn't get a few of the hours done. Can I have all the money still, though? It's like, no way.
Yeah. Okay, so we've never made like streaming an actual component of their contract where it's like, hey, this is the percentage of your contract that is allocated from streaming. It's more along the lines of like, hey, you need to be streaming 20 hours a month, otherwise you will have your salary reduced or fined or this, that, and the other. We've never done that. What we found to be is that we want our players to be kind and to work hard. And if they're not doing those things, then you're not going to earn my respect and my, compassion, if you would. But luckily, we've had generally really good players come through our teams, with few exceptions. But yeah, Loco, it's a great question, and ultimately, I find Misfits and Mayhem to be very familial. So I run and operate the teams like a family, and I want all our players to be that. And so, I expect a lot out of our guys. Mm-hmm. And the moment that they step up, I'm going to be there to tell them, hey, you just fucked up, or you're not in line with expectations. But I'll always be there to support them, because I think far too often teams take the emotional side out of things, and I think it's actually really important not just for our business, but for our players' like health. And ultimately, a player's emotional mental health is going to directly impact their performance on the field, and that performance on the field of the Rift directly impacts our brand. So I think, in Challenger Series, when we had our Challenger Series team and they were operating at a gaming house, the guys were in crappy chairs. So I bought them gaming chairs. And this was, again, 3 years ago, where if they had, a plastic hard chair, they'd be, happy or lucky, right? If they're not playing in their house. And I got them these beautiful chairs and Selfie, I remember vividly, I think he was on stream after we got promoted talking about me getting them chairs. Like, it's just a little...
I mean, he'd spent his whole career on a bench, so he was just happy to be allowed. They write themselves. Keep
man, too easy. But no, but that's just how we sort of how we operated this team, and that is also very reflective, I think, in the people that we have on our org. I think, Loco, from Jake, Jake and Jake's family. You've met his parents, I'm sure, and his siblings, and Hussein. I don't know if you guys have run into a lot of Hussein with the Moose. Just a really great cerebral, warm, caring, sympathetic, empathetic person is kind of fits our tune perfectly.
Okay.
By the way, I actually, this will sound like just like a semantic distinction, but I actually have always liked it when people use the analogy of a family for a team rather than say we're all friends. And the reason I always give for this is because when you say you're a family, funnily enough, people from the outside will actually take this the opposite way to how I'm going to explain it. They'll think when you say we're a family, it means that no matter what, we'll always just stick together, and we'll never be harsh to each other, and we're going to be nice. No, that's actually friends. Friends are supposed to do that. If you're in a family, it actually implies it's almost like, right, well, we're together now, and so we've got to be a group, and but if I'm the dad and you're fucking up and you're ruining your own future and my, then I have to be harsh with you sometimes, or I have to discipline you sometimes. But after that, you can come back into the fold. The only difference obviously is in a real family, you can't just go, actually, this son is really annoying me now. Can I upgrade this? Is there a Korean son I can get here now? At least not if you're a monster anyway.
Yeah. No, but you're exactly right, and that's kind of the tone and culture that we like to implore for our teams.
Well, let's get into the little specifics of the rosters. Starting out with Hansama, you guys, I think, doubled down on Hansama a year ago and extended his contract. So I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you I know so much about the European scene. It's probably one of my weaker knowledge in terms of global League of Legends. What made you guys double down on Hansama and give him a really extended contract?
So for us, when we first got the team, Steven Hansama was 17 years old. Or in fact, I think he might have actually been 16, but turning 17 was eligible to play. And then turning 18, you'd be eligible to play, and then the LCS. So Steven was always this mechanical god, if you would, for his position. He was always known as an up-and-coming kid. We've honestly put a lot of work into Steven, and not just his gameplay, but his his growth. This is someone who, and this guy, he's always known as League of Legends. And when I go to Berlin and meet him for the first time, and I'm like, hey, let's go to a Chinese restaurant, and it's have you ever had fried rice in your life? And he's like, no. Have you ever had this insert normal food selection in your life? And he'd say no. And it's just,
what was the guy eating, Pop-Tarts or something?
I have no idea, but he never had fried rice. He never had sushi. He never had this. He just never had.
This sounds like I don't know if anyone remembers this old school story, but when TSM was rolling in season 2 and they were massive in terms of streaming, there was a famous story where, because he would just stream all day, because by the way, this is back in the days when the actual what do you call it? I can't remember what the term is now. what's the term for like the amount of money that you make? The CPM. There you go. When the CPM was like crazy money but when they were still owned in Twitch, and famously, because if you were a TSM player, you were just raking in money every hour you streamed. Odd One used to just stream like literally just 14 hours a day, and he used to, if everyone remembers, he used to literally not even have a bed, and he would just sleep in like a lawn chair next to his PC, and then just like wait, almost like he was just charging, and then he would wake up and he'd just stream again. But here's the mad detail: because he was never leaving the house. While he would stream, right, he would just eat like TV dinners, and there was so little nutrient content in these TV dinners that this is not a joke. He literally got scurvy. Like, you know that thing that they get on like ships back in the day when like you don't have enough oranges and you're traveling to America or whatever. He actually got that because he just like this is gamers if you leave them to their own devices, you know, like they sort of need a mom to take care of them, don't they?
No, oh my God, you have no idea. These guys. I come first time for LCS, and we moved into a new apartment, and I say to the guys, first of all, I walk in, Alfari, famously, he's in pajamas 24/7. And I say like, what's good around here? You know, tell me what's great. I was like, oh, we're right next to the zoo. Have you been there? Have you been that? These guys, they don't leave the apartment. Yeah. So if they're not forced to, you know, this was back then. Now we have, you know, team outings, we have restaurant outings, we have planned excursions and entertainment, and they're much more well cultured now. I mean, for God's sakes, Berlin is such an amazing city where there is, you know, a ton of history there and a ton of amazing things, both sad and depressing and inspiring from a historical perspective. But you know, now we have a whole different setup. But originally, these guys they play. That's what they do. This is their life. And so but with Steven, we think he's really good. I think that last year he had a really great year. During our run, where I think we were 9-0 or 10-0 or whatever we were, everyone was saying he was the best AD carry. Perhaps in the West, everyone was playing the funnel comp, and we were playing standard comp, and Steven was crushing them. I think that our issues that were exposed later in the season, in people's eyes, people put him down a notch. But I think if you were to ask more objective folks, or I'm biased, but I think if you were to ask unbiased folks, and Thorin, you should chime in here, I think Steven is probably rated top 2 AD carry right now in Europe. Again, I don't know where you can rate Perks, because we haven't seen him. But I think if you take Perks out of the equation for a second, I think people will have a conversation where it's Upset, Hansama,
Reckless,
as sort of your top 3, you know, 80 carries. But I'll leave it for Thorin to sort of chime in there.
I will say, like, I won't say, I'll only jokingly say I'm a hater, because I've learned a long time ago that if in League of Legends, right, someone's a really big fan of someone, they tend to be like, he's number 1, he's the best. And so if you go, actually, I think he's good, but he's number 3, they go, wow, you hate him, why?
Yeah.
You are hate. It's like, well, I did just say he's the 3rd best. That's pretty fucking good, you know. But, you know, I can see why the context for them is. So I'm jokingly saying I'm a hater. Like, I was never super huge on Hans Sama, but I will say, as much as I was trying to think there, like, what would I actually rate him at now? To be fair, as you listed the AD carries off, actually Europe was fairly weak for AD carries. Like, it was quite a shallow pool, you know. Like, as you said, it's hard to get past Reckless, Hansama, like, who then? Like, you know, like even Yana was pretty much criticised a lot. As you say, Upset was like he had a lot of potential, but team wasn't that great. It was kind of like one of the weaker positions in the game. So I can actually see in that sense why, if you want to secure someone, it's a pretty good person to gamble on.
Yeah, he was young. I think that if you also, I think for me the biggest validation, and obviously this was a point in time of how we were playing and just the role that we were on. But I think if you actually were to go ask the players that we played against in Europe, at Worlds, who they most feared going up against, it was our bot lane with Hansama and Ignar, and you know the Uzis of the world. Gorilla, you know, we the reputation of Steven amongst high quality players that I think we all would say have, you know, pretty good opinions on things, all rate him really highly. Mm-hmm. But above all, look, Steven's he's a great kid, good mental mind. Very smart, very kind, very polite. We're happy to have him for another 3 years, and I think he was a big piece of what we were doing. But in terms of our off season, to sort of talk about how that roster was constructed, was really the domino that started the construction of what I think to be a pretty insane roster. Was actually Maxlore was the first domino to fall, and then once Maxlore committed, all the pieces came into play.
What ended up pushing you guys to chase after SOAS instead of staying with Alphari? Because Alphari is someone that LS loves, and a lot of people would say Alphari is a top tier player. I mean, SOAS is also great.
He is.
So yeah.
You know what, Loco? Like, let me just actually for a second, like, tell you something, because I want to see if this mirrors what Ben is about to say, and if I've got the read correct here.
Okay.
So I'm gonna guess this is what's gonna happen. Okay. He's going to tell you something that is impossible. He's going to tell you that simultaneously they didn't pick SOAS over Alphari, but at the same time they managed to simultaneously, like, Alphari was leaving. It's not that Alphari left and said, I don't want to be in Misfits. And it's not that they kicked Alphari, but at the same time, somehow they also, SOAS wanted to be interested, and they ended up with SOAS. And you know what? I don't know how, tripped over, and it worked out great for everyone. So come on then, give me your version of that, Ben. Come on.
So is that supposed to be is that the PR version?
Exactly. Yes, that's the PR version, because people love to do that, where they try to make it sound like, it's like that classic thing, isn't it? Of like, it was a mutual breakup. It's like, right, so which one of you agreed with the other one that the boyfriend and girlfriend are going to break up? So, there's been very few in history that were actually mutual. So come on, give me what if you can come with something better than that, I'll be impressed. So
okay, so I'll just tell you the truth. How about let's start with that.
Okay. All
right. So Alphari is an incredible player. I think, as you said, Loco, folks like LS, again, you ask some of the best players in the world who are some of the best top laners in the world, and Alphari would be among those types of players. I think for us, the way that we were designing, it's one thing to be able to look at a team's game footage and say, hey, this player is a better player than A is better than B. Mm-hmm. Right? You may look at an individual's gameplay, but what the public doesn't see is what's going on in front of, behind the screen, whatever metaphor you want to use. And so I think for us, the change between Alphari and Maxlore was a couple things. Alphari and Maxlore, excuse me. Between SOAS and Alphari was SOAS brings to the table some of the things that we felt our team was missing. So I think for us, historically, we have been a really lane-dominant early game team that would go 50-50 mid-late. And we thought that, at least from what we understood about SOAS, and in speaking with him and speaking with people that have played with him in the past and against him, is the guy is a beast mid-late. He is someone that a team can depend on to not just stay calm, but to actually provide really great direction for a team, where oftentimes our staff would think that our team might look a little bit lost, if you would, and that not to say lost in the sense where they weren't skilled enough, but just sometimes there were moments of times where we would be a little bit scared to pull the trigger or have the idea to do a plan, and in those micro moments you can lose a game. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to be leaning on SOAS for with Maxlore. Maxlore, by the way, is a fantastic shot caller and mind of the game, but we thought that by sacrificing perhaps some of the laning phase differential between SOAS and Alphari, if you believe that Alphari is, say, a better laner than SOAS is, and I'm sure there's stats that can be objective in that regard.
We'll get into that. That's all right. Keep going.
We feel for us that SOAS is going to be a significantly better player for us throughout the rest of the game. Also, I think that with Alphari in particular, it's one of those times where when you've been with someone, to give you a more PR-y thing, but when you've been with someone for so long on a team that sometimes fresh, a fresh start for him is actually better for him, and I think this might be one of those cases.
Okay. See, what I like there, though, is that in answering that way, you actually showed like the different position you're in from when we were talking earlier in the interview. So when you said about getting like the Korean players, Ignar, Kakao, it was just let's get the best players we can right now. Let's try and qualify for the LCS, then let's do what we can. You know, it was a different position to be in. Whereas what I actually like now is this is something I changed over the years in terms of watching League of Legends, because coming from CS, and CSGO obviously is the big game into CS franchise now, in a game like CS where the game is fairly static, like a lot of the elements of the game, and even though it's a team game and definitely team play is important, you can, within your individual capacity of the game, dominate individually. So actually in the game like CSGO, I would usually tell people, you start by just getting the best star player you can, and then you build the players around him. You know, I would say you go that because it's pretty guaranteed whoever the really good star player is, he can get. It's like basketball; he can get his numbers no matter if he's on the worst team. You know, whereas the difference I noticed in League of Legends is obviously, except for this season, like year on year on year, it became more and more about macro and team play anyway. And obviously, stuff like vision control meant like you had to play as a team. You couldn't just be someone like some of my favorite players who just sit in lane and win by CS and then try to dominate the game like the old school times. So to me, a more important factor is like two of the ways you analyzed it there, which is one, you actually want to ask yourself, even if this guy's a really good player, is he actually a good player for my team? Because it's
Correct.
a waste of time having a guy. Like I would agree with you. I think Alfari's a very good laner. But if you're looking for a team that's going to have qualities like you were saying, like someone who can come back in a game, or someone who, if it's 25 minutes, he knows what to do at this point in time. And he knows what he should do elsewhere. That's Soaz. You've actually like perfectly described the opposite players there. So if at this point in time you're transitioning to that team, I'd agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like I've always thought one of the strengths that Soaz had that was very underrated, because here's the funny thing people might not know who are like newer fans to the game, is for the last like 3 or 4 years, Soaz has a really amazing rep of being like a clutch player, like amazing in playoffs. There was a couple of seasons when like Fnatic was falling off, like years back, when people used to say he was a tilter. And they used to say, oh, he just tilts, you know, when the game's going badly. I think he's the opposite of that now. Like even though on his face, when he dies on the player cam, I mean, he is French, so he just go fucking ham. Like he does look like, oh, what the... He does do all that. But I have to say, internally, he manages it amazingly. Like he's one of the only players I've seen as a top laner who, when they, like, I always say this as a general rule, because it's like basically how you should play in solo queue. If you're a top laner, right, and you just feed 1 or 2 kills in the first 20 minutes, I always say this, you don't get to have fun in League of Legends anymore. You are no longer a top laner, you are now a tank. Your job is to only build defensive items, and then we're going to try and win the game, and your job is just take damage. Because at this point, you fucked your lane up so badly. Like, if you try and get kills or build that, like, you're probably just going to feed more kills. That is a general rule. Even applies to a lot of pros. Pros who can either get ahead, or if they don't, like, they have to be able to play, like, you know, like, I have to play conservative now. I have to stroke it in. So as the amount of times I've seen him die, and then like 10 minutes later have the advantage in his lane is unreal. And that takes like a very special mentality to know like when the moment is you can go for a risk, when to play. It's kind of, those are all veteran qualities, you know, like that's worth its weight in gold in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean that was also part of the move. Was like we wanted to get a little bit more veteran on the team. And my God, he's a world-class player. I'm not sure there's a more decorated Western player than Soaz. I mean, I'm sure maybe there's some, but not a lot of people coming top to mind.
No, I think he would be number one. Like if you add in the worlds and stuff, I think he's probably comfortably number one actually.
Yeah, and he was, he was super excited about playing with Misfits and for us from the first conversation we had with him. So it was a little bit of a change of energy, change of play style, change of play dynamic. And again, none of this is a knock on Alfari. I think Alfari is one of the best top laners in the West.
Sure.
I think Soaz is too, and I think Soaz might be able to help our team a little bit more in different ways.
I mean, then moving on to mid lane, FEBIVEN's not someone that had the best year in North America.
I think he had a really good spring split, no?
Yeah, he had a decent spring.
He had some good games, you know, even if his team didn't always look that great, sure. Yeah. It did look like he phoned it in the summer, though. Like, I could already tell in the summer, like, he didn't want to be there. It was like...
So, yeah, I think... go ahead, Loco. Ask
I think the question is, like, FEBIVEN looked bad in summer, and you're taking a huge risk, because rest of your roster looks really great, and you must have spent a lot of money, and mid lane's the most important piece, and Europe's the region where mid lane is incredibly competitive. So, yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, why you guys went with Febi.
So, Febi was a player that we had wanted for a long time. When he actually left to go to North America, as far as I'm understanding, he was debating between us and Clutch. Ultimately, he wanted to try something new and go to North America. I think for him, it's sort of a similar thing, even though those are more similar than, say, Korean to Western culture. I think for him, being in a different country, completely different culture, I think he also had some personal things going on, really impacted his play. But I mean, this guy, I believe he solo killed Faker, was it twice? He's a high quality player, and to be honest, I trust our staff in order to be able to get him in the right mental shape to be a great player. Our chief gaming officer, Joe, would continuously go to bat for Febby, and Febby's also just a great guy. He's really super motivated to prove that he's, quote, back. And again, I put that in quotes because it's a weird thing to say about someone who is, my opinion, really good. So we don't really feel like it's super risky to have Febby. I know that some analysts may disagree, and people think it's maybe one of the weaker spots on our team. But for us, Febby's looked great in the preseason. He's been doing a lot of duos with the guys, and as far as we're concerned, Febby is back on form. Okay. And with Febby in Clutch, like, we were aggressive with pursuing him and reached out to Clutch at the earliest possible, quote, Riot legal time where we're allowed to reach out to other teams and players.
Yes,
and
all
they
above
were
board.
All above board. And we were one of the, he was the person that we sought off. He was one of our first conversations.
Oh,
okay. The only thing
go ahead.
Then.
No, I was going to say that, and we also have the benefit now of having a great academy system that if any of our players were to go through down spurts and needed either extra motivation or some time off, we have what I consider to be one of the best players, not in LCS, with Leader in the mid lane on our academy team. But Febby is we think Febby's going to be great. And will be fantastic for the team, and I really trust our staff in order to get that out of him, because we know he can do it. He's certainly not in that, quote, washed up category. I think that he was arguably top 2 or 3 mid laner in Spring Split, and then I think Summer Split, some of the personal issues and as you say, Thorn, with motivational checkouts. That's our job as a staff to make sure that doesn't happen. But so far, from what we've seen in preseason and coming together with the guys, is Febby is the real deal again. So we're obviously stoked there.
Sure. I would say this, I agree it's a gamble to bring FEBIVEN, but I don't think it's a gamble in the sense that people will think. They'll assume that means oh, who knows what you can expect? Will the guy play shit? Will he play great? It's to me, it's more like it depends on how he adapts to the environment. Because if I look at his career, when he's been on really good teams, he's been really good. When
Correct.
his teams, even when his teams that were good but then had bad periods, he seems to go down with the team as well, because seemingly, as far as I can tell, this is obviously an outside read and I only know him a little bit, is he seems like someone where, I mean, people throw this term around way too loosely, people are emotional, and the problem with that is it's such a weird term, because that could mean a million things. There are a lot of emotions, but I would just say it's more like he seems like someone who, if things are going badly, he's not going to be the guy who's the super captain who turns it all around, is perfect mental position to be in. And to be fair, people won't realize this, but there's a lot of players like that. In fact, you go the other way, like I said before, when I said about the players you can name, Koreans who made it. Same scenario here. If you want to name people who can be on teams that are doing badly and still have an amazing mental attitude to go forwards and play well, it's very rare. There's very few
small
players, So I don't even think that's that crazy a gamble in that sense, because the real question here, Loco, is who were the options? Who else could he have gotten in this scenario? Unless he's getting BDD or something. Yeah. I don't think any of the Westerners are that great. For example, what you trying to get Power of Evil back? I don't know. That's a wash, if not an edge to FEBIVEN on that one, I'd give him. So who else is available? Froggen, doesn't want to come to Europe. There's not really that many players you could have assigned, unless, of course, you'd been willing to sort of sit out by the pool with a pina colada, waiting for Caps to walk by, just saying like, sure would be nice to see you with a rabbit on your jersey, something like that about 4 months ago. If you could have done that, I would have said, yeah, go for it. But aside from that, if you're going to play it all above board, I mean, what a fucking Boy Scout we've got here, Loco. If that saying, Ben, in American sports, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Aside from that, if you're only going to go legal route, I guess FEBIVEN's the best play you can get.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to respond to that.
Don't address that. Just pretend like we're moving on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I mean, final piece of your roster, Gorilla. I love that you guys got Gorilla, and I think he's a great fit. But from like an ownership perspective, I would have been like, we have 4 European players. Why don't we just get a 5th European player? Like, why do we need to go all the cuts by getting Gorilla? You guys ended up getting an assistant Korean coach in Pumandu. You guys got a translator. I mean, you guys probably got Korean cooks and everything. Like, just by getting one Korean player, you had to get a lot of additional staff. It wasn't just getting Gorilla. Yes, I'm curious why you guys.
Wait a minute. One question. Well, put a pin in that a second, because I'll remember the question. But a quick side tangent. Did you actually get Korean cooks?
No, but our chef does cook Korean.
Right, because the reason I ask that is because here's the one thing that anyone who's been to the ULCS knows, is that Korean food in Germany is an abomination. It's not Korean food. Like, their version of Korean food is so whack, it's unreal. Like, if you've ever been to gone to Seoul or even LA, K-Town in LA, it's a joke, their idea of Korean food. Like, that's one of the reasons, low-key, I actually think that Koreans didn't want to go to LCS aside from money in the EU back in the days, because you get there and then you order it, and you're like, what? That's not even Korean food. That's just a piece of meat. What is that?
There are a couple of there are 1 or 2 really good Korean approved Korean restaurants in Berlin. Berlin does have
Cologne had the bad shit then, because Cologne was terrible for it, I know.
Yeah, no. There are a couple. Actually, Berlin has some really great Asian food in general. So like Thai, Chinese, Korean. There actually is a decent sized Korean community in Berlin. So it's not god awful. It's certainly not going to be Koreatown like in LA. But for us, again, going behind the veil a little bit of our team and the team construction, one of the reasons why, because Mickey, people would argue that Mickey mechanically is the best European support player. And we had him on our team. However, what you would need to know, again, behind the screen, whatever the hell you want to say, metaphor, the way that our team constructed and the dynamic within our team was Steven Hansama is a quiet player. He's a quiet person in life. He's rather shy. If you ever watch him on post-game interviews, he's a little bit timid. And so for us, we require a very vocal, almost shot-calling support engage player, if you would. Okay. And Ignar was great for us in that regard. He was famously, a great engage support player for us. Mm-hmm. And so when we started thinking about where we wanted to go with the support role in the offseason, we wanted to find the absolute best engage shot calling support player that we could find. And so when we started thinking about the European options, we were not, jumping up and down. When you start thinking about some of the really good supports out there outside of Europe, and you start thinking about, I'd put Core JJ in that list, obviously Gorilla, Sword Art, the guy that was in Turkey. Why is he escaping me?
Snowflower?
Snowflower. Yeah. So that mold of player that can be Sword Art. A lot of people don't know that the guy was actually the shot caller for that team. And so that was the type of level of the player that we was a world class support player that would be able to help Steven grow, because Steven is one of these really super mechanically talented players, but Steven's not going to be the person to control the bot lane, right? Mm-hmm. So you'll have players, Reckless, for example, who's a very vocal area, vocal AD carry player that will take full control of the lane and dictate everything. Steven's more reserved and more relies on his cerebral and his mechanics. So really finding someone that we felt would foot that bill. The amount of names that were on that list was not large. And let's be real. When you have Soaz, Febi, Max Lore, and Hansama, like we're not aiming for, you know, 4th place, 3rd place, 2nd place. I want to win, and we were not going to, quote, take a chance on the support position, given we know the bot lane with Steven with the way that he plays and what best suits our team. Gorilla is the absolute perfect fit. I mean, the guy is, you know, clearly his reputation speaks for itself, and his English is really good. Like we don't even, you know, to be completely frank, like we don't need a full translator for Gorilla. The guy is already memeing in our group chat in English and is basically conversational. Like one of the things we did when we were recruiting Gorilla was I Skype group called him with the entire team. At that point, it was Febi, Soaz, Maxler, Hansama, and he was still at the game house in Korea. And we Skype chatted him, and he was telling us about like K-pop and Korean anime and what he likes to watch. And you know, his English is really great, and clearly we think he's one of the best players in history in the position. And we said, let's do it.
Well,
by the way, plus you also have to take into consideration, and I'll address this to Loco again, just to avoid the potential of Ben replying to a joke and getting himself in trouble. The problem is, Loco, you have to understand, he knew Mickey X was gone because about a week before the trade deadline, he got a Farmville invitation from Perks. So right, start looking for transfer people already.
So
No
Ben,
comment.
I mean, you guys must have spent tons on this roster, tons on the staff. How are you gonna justify the spendings? Like, that's one thing like that always I have to question, like teams like Team Liquid, like teams like you guys that go and get the best rosters possible. Like, even if you guys win, like, does that somehow put you in the green with sponsors? Like, how does a team like you guys like justify spendings? Because at a certain point, like, esports has to be sustainable. We can't just keep soaking money into this. Like, one day the bubble's gonna burst. So maybe it's a grim question, but how do you justify spending so much for a roster and just constantly investing and investing?
Yeah, no, it's not a grim question. It's a totally fair question. For us, we had multiple conversations internally, and it was, what are our goals and objectives for the next few years? And for us, it was, you know, how do you, let's take aside for a second just the league side, right? Because part of our goals and objectives as a team is to grow the league, because a huge component of our future revenue is league revenue share.
Mm-hmm.
So taking that aside, and let's just talk about, so we're in Europe, and you have what I would consider to be a couple of gorillas in the room. You know, G2 and Fnatic, and Schalke by virtue of extension of their brand from football. But let's just take a look at G2 and Fnatic for a second.
Mm-hmm.
These are teams and orgs that have been around for many, many years. I mean, my God, Fnatic is probably, I would say, the most well-known team in the world, potentially.
I think at this point in time, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're very popular in Asia with the Dota team, Southeast Asia. I mean, certainly in the Western world, they're the most well-known team, I would argue. And G2 has achieved incredible brand growth over the past few years, and you have to ask yourself, how did they do that? They didn't do that by coming in 7th. Okay, this is a team that has a lot of trophies in their office and their plaques on their walls, and so you build a brand right now through winning, and that's just simple truth. You know, look at brand growth from the teams in North America. 100 Thieves is an interesting, I would say, case study where they would potentially argue themselves that they are not an esport team, but they're more a lifestyle brand. But didn't they win Spring Split or they were
went
top
to
two?
finals.
Second,
They went to
Yeah.
finals.
So this is also a team that built a lot of competitive success. What would 100 Thieves be if they were 10th place? I'm not sure. So I think that for us, answering the question out of the gate was, how do we continue to build and grow our brand? We achieved, I would say, incredible competitive success in our first year, and off of the back of that World's run, we got one of the largest sponsorships in esports when you think about from a category perspective with Alienware. That's a direct result. If we don't go to Worlds and we're in 10th place, like are we going to be relevant with conversations with sponsors? I don't know. I don't want to take that chance. And so for us, is it an expensive roster relative to peers? Probably. I don't know exactly how much everyone else is paying their players, but are we going Liquid style crazy? No, I think EU is from a salary perspective a little bit lower than NA, and I think there's a couple of reasons why. I think we have more talent. I think that there's less talent in North America, and therefore you have probably more imports and positions in North America where there's a lack of a bench. So I think that there's more talent in Europe, and to be honest, in an absolute sense, are we spending a lot of money? Sure. But are we spending a lot of money relative to what we're trying to build? And the answer is we think we're spending a fair amount of money.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean,
well, yeah, basically, like I would give the analogy to, if you take any traditional American sports, whether it's the NFL, the NBA, there are always the teams that, like, because in those sports you can actually, like, there's a loophole with the luxury tax where you can get around you can actually pay higher than the actual salary cap is. But if you do that, you're obviously just bleeding money because it's not supposed to happen. It's a loophole. They actually make it so that every $1 million you spend over the salary cap in the NBA, you pay something like double that amount at the end, like as like a fine or something weird like that. And so what they do is you only do that if you've got such a good team that it's like, right, I've got a really good team, but at the moment, like, let's say we're like the third best team. But if I get this player, okay, it'll push me over the salary cap, but I might be like the champion. I might be able to actually have like the best team. So at that point in time, even though I actually will lose money relative to the other teams, that, there'll be a team, obviously every year in every team sport, there'll be one team that has a cheap roster and they just get lucky. They find gold, But the difference is that ain't guaranteed. And so actually the question, if you think about it, Loco, I'm not saying this to flame you actually on this one. It just doesn't make as much sense if you flip it the other way. Like, let's imagine you've got SOAS and you've got FEBIVEN, and you've signed all these guys, and at the end you go, that's a pretty good team. Why don't we just cheap out on the last guy? It's like, at that point in time, when you spent that much of the money, why not just go ahead and get the last guy and try and win everything and become a massive org, right? Why go like, I'll gamble on the last one? It's actually more risky in a weird way. Bearing in mind where esports is going, as we said in the valuations before, the gamble's worth it now, actually, because whatever you're paying above the odds for this one player, if you win LCS and then Worlds and then these sorts of things, your org might be worth $100 million in 2 more years,
Mm-hmm. I mean, take a look at the teams on Forbes's list. We can have a 3-hour conversation about that list, but
as a general trend, there's something to it. Sure, there was a lot of bullshit, but as a trend, there's a logic to it. Yeah,
but take a look at those teams. Those are by and large very successful, competitive organizations. Yeah.
Most of them are championship orgs. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. That's exactly right. So for us, and by the way, it's not like, in my opinion and estimation, we're not spending 3 times more than any other. Are we spending more? Sure. I'd be lying to your faces if I said we're not spending more than your average team or your typical team. But we're not talking, millions and millions and millions. It's not like we're spending 3 million euros or dollars than another team. The relative increased spend is actually probably less than you may imagine.
Well, you guys asked me about if you have a good roster already, why wouldn't you spend for the final piece? And that's something that CLG did. They got FEBIVEN, someone that was very, very hyped. And they ended up reaching out to some European top laners, as we saw with Jacob Wolf's report with Oromne and some of the others. And they also reached out to Flame. But in the end, they decided to stay with Darshan. And I would imagine it's to keep their budget reasonable. So and with Echo Fox and Optic, they are trying to be more budget reasonable. And I can see the bubble's already bursting for some of the teams, and they're not going Liquid style in terms of spending. So yeah, I was kind of curious on why Misfits would be willing to spend that much and like go out of their way to make sure they have the best player possible in each position, where some of the North American teams.
I think that for us, that it also goes back to some of the original questions that I think it was Thorne you posed, which is how do you view yourself? If we viewed ourselves as a pure sport team, sure. Would I be potentially better off going, the Moneyball method, what the Oakland A's did in baseball, where, for those that aren't aware, they basically relied heavily on data and analytics. They put together a team that was, I think they were maybe in the bottom 5 of payroll in baseball. And they played Moneyball, which was go with analytics, go with data, build young. And they ended up being quite successful in that style. And some other teams try to adapt them. But I think for us, we don't view ourselves just purely as a sport team. And so, we are a commodity in many regards because people are buying us, sponsors, right? And in order to build a brand, you have to put money behind it. If you're launching a new energy drink to go up against Red Bull and Monster, are you going to spend, very small funds on marketing efforts? The answer is no. So, for us, we are building a brand. It's not just we are a sport team. We're building a brand. This is a media company, a tech company. It's not just a sports company. And sometimes you need to, perhaps allocate a little bit more funds to something than something else. It's kind of the simplest way to explain it.
That's also where there is like a counterintuitive logic, which is that even though you might be spending more now than, Loco give the example of CLG, we'll just say any other team. Another team, decides to go a bit more budget. Well, you know what? If their team then doesn't do as well, and then they also, by spending less money, didn't get the big names, they then maybe don't get as good a sponsor. So actually, in the end, they even literally, in terms of revenue coming in, might be getting less. So in some senses, you certainly, as a general rule in sports, have to pay to win. Aside from the rare examples I gave of people just strike gold, the phantom player that no one knew was going to be good. Generally, you have to pay. Like if you look at any traditional sport, like I alluded to before, the teams that win and go very deep in the NBA playoffs are nearly all the teams with the highest payroll. It's just a fact.
Yeah, there's always going to be like Vitality last year was essentially 4 rookies and Kikis, right? Us in 2017, essentially all rookies. No one had been to Worlds before. I think Ignar was there maybe as a sub or something, but we were essentially rookies. And I guarantee it, there's going to be a team this year in the LEC that people are going to undervalue because their names on the roster are not so sexy, but everything will converge for them and they'll be successful. For us, we didn't want to take that risk. We wanted to increase the odds of chances for our success, and that was by going for an expensive roster.
Okay. Dorian, do you want to give us another topic? You have the topic sheet.
Okay, yeah. You're such a moron, mate. Like I know you in your life have never stopped and thought about. So like you're one of those people that defines what's wrong with American culture, right? So I'll give you a great example. There was an interview people might have seen online where Kanye West went on, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel was the talk show. And on the talk show, Jimmy Kimmel, out of nowhere, just asks Kanye West something like, so why did you make a tweet that was positive about Donald Trump? Like an incredibly potentially incendiary topic to a guy who's like live on television. So what Kanye West did, right, was actually what an intelligent person should do. He thought for a second, like, how should I answer this? And then Jimmy Kimmel just went to a break and then they never came back to the topic, right? So people thought, oh, see, he stumped him. He didn't have an answer. Actually, the intelligent thing to do when it's a really difficult question is think about it and come up with something good. So little tip for you there, Loco. What you can do is you can actually make that system so that you think before the words come out of your mouth. You don't just go, oh, who said that? Me? Oh, well, guess we'll go with that then. Like, just a tip in your career. Anyway, so here's the question that we'll ask that's good, that I filled for to be able to think.
Okay.
This is the question, right? So one of the angles that they always sell the EULCS, now the LEC on, Ben, which I've always thought was a very difficult one because there's a grain of truth to the fact that there's something there with like the different countries are untapped to some degree, like that's what they obviously want to do with the national leagues. And that's like the equivalent of what the academies, etc., and they're trying to build up these national scenes which are going to feed into the LEC and make it so that it's not just top heavy. You haven't only got the ULCS and then nothing, and then all these untapped markets, which obviously in America it's not really the case because you've just got the country of the USA and then you've got the NALCS.
Yeah. Yep.
You don't really need the same system, and if anything, I would say the equivalent in America is probably even like some of the collegiate stuff. That kind of is a natural feeder system because you have that in American sports anyway. It's not such a big thing in Europe anyway. But one angle on that I find kind of tricky, like how we're going to make this leap, is okay. Let's say over this chasm here, there's all this untapped potential and land and resources we can get to, and if we can get there, it'll be amazing. If we can build this grassroots scene to connect to the LEC, Europe could be one of the biggest regions in the whole world. It could be crazy, the numbers and the revenue and all the rest of it. But the angle on that people don't address that's really tough is if you do have these national scenes, and if you're trying to develop those angles, like it's still going to be incredibly hard to actually like parlay that into your team, like to get a fan base from country X. Like you can have a player from France and get some French fans, but does that then mean you don't have fans in Germany if you don't have any German players? And likewise, with the sponsor scenario, this was always the problem from day one in Europe, which everyone didn't address, right? Because since a lot of the NA owners, I'll go ahead and say, initially were actually in some cases better businessmen. Like they just knew better how to set a deck and how to sell the future of esports and how to brand beyond just a team. Like it's not just, hey, I've got the best team. It's like, hey, this is what my team's about and why we've got fans. Even though they were generally better, one angle I always used to say was illogical, right? Is if I had some, I won't say which owners, but I had some owners even privately tell me like, those idiots in the ULCS, they just don't know how to like, approach sponsors properly and build a brand. And I said, really? Why haven't you bought yourself an ULCS team then? Go over and get all that free money. What? You've basically got the equivalent of, in your version, we'll give the analogy of like, you're at the moment in NALCS, you're in Europe, it's all developed, you've got all these countries, they're all really high tech, and someone's told you about, there's America, there's this whole continent with all this great stuff. What, and you just stay back home in Europe trying to grind it out next to your phone? I don't think so. If you really believed that, you'd go over there and kill it in Europe. You'd be wanting to switch to Europe. Now, the reason I know they didn't know is because the thing that no one's ever been able to get over in Europe, you alluded to it before with like the fractured cultures, is there aren't like single budgets that cover all of Europe generally from sponsorships. So it's a lot harder to get the same sort of like money through the door and to like basically scale the business up as esports gets bigger. How do we address some of these issues? Like what, I mean, I'm not saying that like anyone's got the solution, but how do you even start to tackle these paradigms? Because it's very different to NA in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Because basically there's two angles. I'll make it quick. You've got the fan engagement, again, fractured among all the countries. And then you've got the angle of how do you get the sponsorship part to the same degree as... Because in America, to some degree, it will scale as esports goes. The rising tide will lift all ships, as it were.
Yeah. So a lot to in there. But basically, we approach things in a couple different ways. One is we plan to leverage our players in their native tongue. We've done it before, like when we've done some stuff with Hansama, for example, in French. We'll continue to leverage Hansama and SOAS in the French community. They're both obviously very popular there. But ultimately, the way that we view sponsors is we think that there's enough. Look, let me back up one step. We're not going to have 50 sponsors, right? If you look at let's take a traditional sport team, they can have 30, 40, 50 partners. When we think about a share of voice for our sponsors that we're building out, both across the Mayhem and the Misfits, we actually think it's a more limited pool of like 10 to 12. And so we think that there are plenty of global companies that have multinational efforts. And so I'll take Alienware, for example. And just because it's an endemic to gaming, there are clearly non-endemics that fit this exact mold, but because Alienware is an actual example, tangible, that I can talk about, I will. So when we do our media planning for Alienware, again, Dell Alienware is a multinational global company that happens to be headquartered both in Austin, Texas, and in Miami, Florida. And Alienware was actually co-founded in Miami, and then Dell bought them, and Dell's based out of Texas. So the budgets for the world are actually still managed out of Texas. And the media planning, though, is they leverage different agencies around the world. So when we are working with Alienware, we're working with North American media planners, and we're also working with their European-based media planners. So we're going to a multinational, a global company that has very specific market initiatives that they're looking to employ. So for Alienware, for example, you're going to see at some point this year advertisements in French with SOAS and Hansama. Okay, so that's taking a local tune, but then you're also going to see English ads from both of them and from us from the teams. So it's kind
obviously
of
SOAS will be subtitled.
Well, yeah. But what I'm saying is we approach it both ways. So we're in talks with, again, probably two things that will close within the next 60 days, where these are large Fortune 500 companies that are global but still have local sales initiatives. So I'll take one who we're not talking to, for example, or take like an energy drink company. Clearly, if you're Monster, you want to sell in North America, but you also want to is available in Germany. You're going to want to sell it in Germany. So we really try to leverage the players' natural language and where their core fan base comes from to try to push it. And then in the case of someone like Gorilla, who's just globally well known, we'll be using him in English as his primary language, because we're not going to be capable of selling into Korea as our NA and EU would be our primary focus. But by the way, also the number one, if you look at the data from Riot, that's either publicly or privately, I don't even know. But obviously, the English stream is still the dominant percentage
of course, yeah.
Language. So it's not like it's like French is the number one language. When we're still having conversations with partners, that's sort of the angle that we take.
Fair enough.
But generally speaking, though, in terms of, look, I don't have all the answers. I don't think Riot has all the answers. I think what's important, though, is that Riot is willing to try different things. So as where before, I think Riot had this image where like they would come out with something and this is, the perfect loaf of bread. Mm-hmm. I think at least what we're getting from all of the conversations we're having with them now is, hey, look, we don't know exactly what's going to be the best model here. What is going to be the tie-in between the regional league teams, which I think there have been some announcements so far. The UK has Fnatic and Excel. I think Spain has Origin, G2, Splice. I forget who else. We will be. I'm not sure if we've announced our region, but I have no problem saying we're actually going to be in the French region, in the
that
French
one was
regional
actually
league.
Obvious.
And so again, that's another thing where we're going to leverage our main team to help support a local brand, and to the extent that we can find, French partners that want to partake in that with us. I think that's just more the merrier and is low hanging fruit. Okay. But to be honest, Thorne, I don't think there's a magic bullet here. No. I think it's going to be a lot of iterating, a lot of A/B testing. I think, right now the leagues, you have LVP, I think, running both UK and Spain. There's another partner that's going to be running France. I don't know if it was announced or not. I didn't want to spoil that one. But I don't have all the answers, but I think people around the room that ultimately will figure it out. And I think that goes into the long-term play here, right? It's like I don't look at League of Legends for us to have to be, super successful within the next 18 months. It's like, how do we make sure that this is still the biggest esport in the world come 3, 4, 5 years out? And I think that there's enough smart people around to really figure that out.
Okay. Well, in the vein of what I said before, though, wouldn't that set up that premise I had of like, if these guys are so smart, why don't you come into the EU LCS? Like, in a weird way, Isn't that kind of a position you're in? Because actually, if we look at EU, it's true there were a lot of like different problems to trying to be an NA brand, to make an EU brand, and to have success and to make actual profit off a team. But I also have to say, to be fair, in the same way I gave credit to some of the NA owners, there have also been a lot of bad owners in Europe. Like some of them really did just only think from an esports perspective. Like they were just trying to make a winning team, or they were from the world, for example. I'll give you a great example. Okay, a team I actually used to work for like half a decade ago was SK Gaming. And the reason why they haven't been around for a long time in League of Legends is because, this will sound weird, because they are a team that has never died. They have gone through all the recessions, they've gone through all of esports going up and then becoming a bubble and bursting and going down to almost nothing. They have had to learn to survive. And so their main mentality for a long time was like, no matter what happens, we will never risk going bust. Because what's the point in, surviving all this period to now and then just having it all die? Now, obviously, that is not really a mentality that's going to be like the ideal approach to the current market we're in now, where, as you see, people like bringing in investment, you're trying to grow the whole thing. And then essentially, on some level, everyone's taking risk that we're going to have to like lose money basically now to one day maybe make a way more money and make this a massive thing, not just a cool little esports game that we can grind out a little profit from. And, we like games anyway. So a lot of the owners in EU actually did have that mentality until very recently, actually, until even the prospect of franchising. Like, that's one of the reasons I personally have a lot of respect for G2, beyond the success in the game. Forget winning titles in different games. As you say, G2 as a brand went from like that joke Gamers 2 brand that was like a vanity project for Ocelot to legitimately, they're probably the best brand in Europe right now. I know Fnatic has the reach and the fame, like you say. Fnatic wasn't doing that well in finances over the last few years. They took a while to like level up themselves. So in Europe, it's kind of like, in terms of good businessmen, I don't know that every team has them at the moment. Like there's a lot of sort of ground to maybe pull ahead of other teams in that sense, right?
Yeah, and that's where I think we've sort of shined. I think that you're exactly right. And when you think about what Carlos has done, that guy is driven like none other. The passion that he exudes in building G2 into a brand. There's Carlos is a special dude. Memes aside, he wants to grow G2 into $1 billion company. And how do you do that? It is building that brand. And yeah, I think you're right. I think some owners in the past that have just been purely focused on either esports, or you've had teams where perhaps it was just a marketing vehicle for a product. With Roccat, I never met the owners of Roccat. Managers of the thing, and so for me it was like, well, what do they really care about what they're doing here, and what was the point of their team? I personally can't answer that because I never really heard it from them. For us, it's building a kick-ass brand. I think that our brand with Misfits has the potential to be just like a G2. When you think of G2, you think villains. When you think of Fnatic, you think heroes. And when you think about Misfits, I think what we're trying to show people with Misfits is be yourself and be different, and inclusion and family and all those things that I spoke about earlier about how we run and operate our company from a culture perspective is really what our brand is. And continue to hone out that message. We've got what I think to be Carlos loves to say they've got the best content in EU. But I want to tell you something. The content that our team pumped out in 2018 was, without a doubt, objectively speaking, the best. And I think that the reason why is because what we did was we actually told the stories that Riot used to tell. Riot used to have this thing called, I think it was called, was it Drive?
The one where Shox was in the back of that car with like the players and stuff.
Oh, well, they had the Drive-In with Shox.
Oh, you mean the documentary series?
The documentary series.
Yeah. So famously, for example, there was a very good one with Matt from Team Liquid, you might remember.
That's right.
Hawaii, yeah.
And so Riot actually stopped telling those stories. And I think that storytelling in esports has sort of drifted. And I think that the content that teams have been pumping out have just been sort of like, well, our team is winning and losing and going along that journey. Okay. I think that's pretty standard stuff. I think for us, it's like, who is Hansama? Who is Hussein Musfi? Like what makes Moose? We did one on Senkux. We did one on Mickey, where it's like telling their story and where they came from and who their family is. And at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? And being able to tell our players as not just machines, but as actual human beings and their story and their, what makes them them. Like, for example, do you know who Reckless is? Like, do you know? Like, yeah, you have an idea.
Sure.
Caps. Like, do you know who Caps is? Like, yeah, you have an idea of who he is.
Turns out Fnatic didn't know themselves. They probably should have done a documentary series or something,
Again, I stepped into that.
I know, keep going.
But for us, it's really, bringing to life players that just have these personas. And at the end of the day, I think that everyone has a story to tell. And people may think things about us or Loco or Thorn and who you are, but really, what makes a player, what is their story? I think everyone has a story, and our job as a team is to tell that. So building the brands of our players is equally as important as building the brand of our team.
Sure. No, dude, that's one of the areas I think is actually the most wasted and still under, I guess, how do you say it? Untapped? I would still say untapped, because people so far, admittedly, they had smaller budgets to do these things. Organizations were smaller. Even your media team in the bold days was 2 people. It wasn't like a whole team of people and a camera guy and all the. So, admittedly, they had less resources. But I'm amazed how many teams thought having media involved just doing a reality series and that's it, and then doing the odd, blog post or an interview. People don't seem to realize, bearing in mind, as you say, the real thing people had to figure out, and it was people like Cloud9 who latched on this very early on, is you make it more about the brand than even the success of the sporting side. You make it around the idea you want to have is you want the success, but you don't want it to be right, we're only successful because we win in the game. It's we're successful even if we lose, and if we win and we have all the personalities in the fan, now we're just super over the whole game. So I always thought from day one, I mean, if anyone's looked at my career, it's the style of content I have focused on heavily. As much as someone might say, a classic sort of criticism of my content, for example, would be well, does he know enough about the macro elements of the game, and has he really studied the game in that way? It's the guy saying that, even if he really does want a really in-depth article, it's 8,000 words, and it's GIFs of the lane matchups, and here's what he could have done in the draft here, and he probably should have taken priority from this. And it's there's about you and about 10 people who really want to read that article. But you know what? An article that just outlines the narrative structure of a player's career, and when he was the hero, and then when he fell off, and then when he had to come back from the world. You don't even have to mention the game. The actual storyline of the guy will draw people to that player. And that's why, as I said in the case of the Drive episode with Matt, or when people found out the story of certain players who've had a very tough past, they instantly root for the guy when they might not even have liked him as a player. It's it's the easiest way to connect a fan to a player, because to connect a fan to a player just on his game, you have to basically be faking. You have to be so outrageous. It's you have to watch that guy. Otherwise, there's a billion players who are good at the game. That ain't enough,
You're speaking to the choir. I should clip this.
And it's actually, by the way, dollar for dollar, compared to trying to win in the game, it's way cheaper to make the media. The media actually can, and some of it can pay for itself if you get the right sponsorships and stuff.
Yeah, no, you are spot on, and that's our thesis on how we view content for our team. Spot on.
That's where you did. Here's the thing. Even I'll give you it. Okay, I'll say maybe Misfits is better than G2 on that one, but you dodged a bullet on this one, because I will say a few years ago when G2 was getting big, because I've known Ocelot since the SK days, because he was a player in SK at the time, and he's always actually been someone who's been very supportive of my content and stuff. He did actually come to me and basically say, is there any way I can get you to just work for G2, just become G2 content creator or whatever? And at the time, I'm not going to lie, one of the main reasons I didn't do it is because as an independent, I found a lot of success because I can constantly pivot. I can go and do this game, and I can switch to this sponsor, and I can get a sponsor, for example, with some of the gambling sponsors you can't have if you're in a team. So I actually thought, even just from a monetary angle, it didn't make as much sense. I don't know if I would ever do it now, but I can't lie. There is a part of me when I saw that Forbes article, it's G2 valued at 105 million. I was sort of maybe I should have taken the salary and the 1% equity I could have probably grind out, when it wasn't worth anything. I don't know. I look back on that. That was maybe a missed opportunity for all of us. So
Well, there's never say never, man. We're still in the nascent times, I think. Still think there's so much room to grow, which is one of the reasons why we're really excited. But yeah, I mean, look, that's how we view content. We think it's a little bit different, and it's not just about like, hey, we lost this week, let's talk about how we lost. It's like, get to know us as who we are, like what makes us us. Get to know our story, and at the end of the day, I think everyone is a misfit for any particular reason why. That's a personal reason for everyone.
Shouldn't that be the tagline for the brand? Everyone's a misfit.
Yeah, I mean, it
so
is.
So find the place where your family welcomes you, some shit like that. Come on, get that on a drawing board somewhere. Get a team working on it.
We do.
Focus groups.
We do. We have all that stuff coming out, and we're gonna have, with the 2019 season starting next year, next month in January. You're going to see a lot of that really well thought out messaging and branding and
unfortunately,
really...
you will now be fined an incredible amount for poaching by just saying everyone's a misfit because what are you implying?
Oh shit!
Like, Jesus, what have you done? Stop that! Delete that from the VOD. Delete that from the VOD, Loco. Like we can't get in trouble.
Everyone is a misfit. Yeah, that's right. Unbelievable. I gotta be careful.
He's gonna get fined for the entire world now. Every player. That's not.
I'm screwed. We're screwed.
Well, it's good while it lasted. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Loco, I think we've had a pretty in-depth thing. So do you have any last topic, or should we go to the viewer questions?
Yeah, let's go to the viewer questions. I know Ben isn't like a player or a content creator. He probably has meetings right after this, so...
no worries. Hey, listen, it's 5:30. I'm going to be having dinner with my kid. When take as much as you want, as many questions as you want.
All right, so I'm going to link to Discord. You guys can ask in general, and you guys can also just ask on Twitch chat. I'll take questions from Discord, Twitch chat, wherever. If you can send a letter to my house and it gets here before the episode finishes, I'll also take that. Just come ask in general. Anything you want to ask Ben, anything you want to ask Doran, anything you want to ask me, but primarily focus on Ben and Doran.
You're getting shy there, Loco.
No, because someone has to kind of like host while we do this. And
Plus, you have to realize Loco's a streamer, which involves like sitting like this, slanted to one side, listening to Nuja Bears, and then just answering every question that like the people actually pay you the money say, and just going like, well, DJ764, yeah, probably could have stayed in Golden Guardians, but whatever, I think I'm sticking with streaming now. It's like, what's that? All right, yeah, let's go and get In-N-Out Burger because that's the best food in the world, apparently. Like, fucking hell, it's a hard life, in it. I don't know how they do it.
Dude.
Heroes, someone call them, I don't know. If you got a question on Loco, I'm the best at filling. You don't even realize I'm doing that shit. I think I actually care about these opinions I'm saying. Have you found a question yet?
All right. Let's see. Okay, why is the logo a bunny?
I've
got something for this already, so go ahead. You can go first.
Honestly, the true story of that question is just simply that we acquired the team like 24 hours before we had to give something to Riot Games, and when we acquired the roster and team from Badawi and Monte Cristo, the assets for the Misfits logo sort of came with it. We've since tweaked it and changed it since then, but there's not a great
exactly. You know what, Ben? I'll give you an example of how narratives and the power of them is way more exciting because as they say, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. So ignore everything he just said there, guys. What actually happened was they were looking at the European LCS, and I'm going to completely ignore even the facts of the timeline and the chronology and when they had the logo. I'm going to pretend I'm making it all up right now. So come into my world, everyone. You're already in my world, actually. Just pretend that you're coming in now. So you're in the Thorn Zone. What happened was they looked at the European LCS and they saw some of the other moves that were starting to happen, and they said we're going to get Korean players. We're going to get Kakao at jungle, fucking motherfucking legend in this building. We're getting Ignar in the building. We're getting these players. And then they saw elsewhere, G2 picked up this little known jungler who was Korean as well called Trick. And they were like, stupid idiot, tricks are for kids. And then they made this bunny logo. But the problem is Kakao, one of the 5 bunnies, unfortunately he did die of myxomatosis. So that was very sad. It's kind of like the end of Watership Down. It's quite tragic. So.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Yeah.
Again, no comment.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I should have said we were gonna do it, but then we thought, what's the nemesis to the cat? And it was the bunny. But what's actually interesting, in a real sense though, is we've sort of taken the qualities of a rabbit into some of our branding. So like we like to think that we're, fast or quick-witted or a little bit mischievous, a little bit cynical. Some of those qualities, I think we actually have taken on into some of our brand. Like we make fun of ourselves, although I'm not sure rabbits make fun of themselves, but they do in my mind. So let's roll with it.
Okay. So this one's for Doran, but Ben can also answer. As an esports, League of Legends viewer base are mainly players of the game. CSGO, however, has viewers that haven't even touched the game. What effect does this have on the esports side for you?
See, that's one thing I've actually made. I can't remember if I've specifically. This is one of those topics because I've talked about it so many times. I can't remember if it has its own video or I've just mentioned it on talk shows. But the short version is this: like, until recently, especially if you go back to when the LCS began, I used to have a great line that I used to be able to open. Like, I'll give you a great example. Okay, I once had to go and I got invited by a university. It was actually like the London School of Economics in London, which is like a prestigious university. I got invited by the gaming club to speak about esports, and they just said speak about any topic. And so I actually thought, well, they expected me to just speak about like, a game of esports, and like, here the games are cool and it's getting big and all the usual garbage you tell them. But what I told them instead was, since you guys are into economics, here's what I'll do. I'll actually pull back the veil a little bit. And I'll give you some of the concepts of esports that are economically driven that you won't know about if you're a fan. And so I told them, here's an opening statement that will blow your mind, which is that League of Legends, this is like back in 2014 or 2015. I said League of Legends is actually one of the worst viewer esports that has actually ever existed at a premier level. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the sheer number of people who play the game and then the amount who actually watch the game, it was at that point in time not a very good conversion ratio. Like, actually, what's crazy is League of Legends had the most viewers of any esport, but it's not a thing that you view as an absolute thing, because what you want to know is how many people who I could have viewed the esport am I getting through the door. So you had more than CS, but CS had way less players and way less people interested. So the difference is, in League of Legends, I think part of the difficulty has always been, part of what makes League of Legends very successful is the casual game, and the casual game is so different to the actual pro game that I think that a lot of people who just like League of Legends to play the game naturally are never gonna actually go ahead and follow it. It's like, I'll give you a good example. One of the reasons why I always used to wonder why soccer never took off in the US is because there are actually a lot of people play soccer in the US, especially in school. And like, obviously a lot of the girls' teams are soccer teams, but the viewing numbers, they're still not very good for soccer. So they've never managed to get the conversion ratio there. Whereas, for example, obviously you go around the world, the viewing numbers for soccer are insane. So in CSGO, it's got an unfair advantage, which is like, first of all, it is such an old game that everyone knows the concept of Counter-Strike. Like, someone's played Counter-Strike when they were 12, or they've seen a game 10 years ago, and it hasn't changed fundamentally enough that you watch it now and you're like, what is going on? Whereas if you actually played League of Legends in Season 2 and you started watching a Worlds game in Season 7, you'd have no clue what was going on. You wouldn't even understand like the lane assignments. You wouldn't understand why didn't they go for this gank? Why didn't you wouldn't you wouldn't understand why is this champion different? What the fuck, Galio's like, none of these things would make sense to the guy who hadn't played the game. Whereas Counter-Strike, it has that quality that I always give the analogy of why poker got really big on television, because they used to use that classic line. It's a great marketing line. Like, it's the game that takes like a few seconds to learn and a lifetime to master. Counter-Strike's like that. The good thing about Counter-Strike is you can actually enjoy the game and feel as though you know what's going on just by watching a guy shoot people in the head. And you'll have almost no clue what's going on, but you'll get the feeling like you're involved. Whereas like beyond that though, the reason why you don't then go, well, now I know all more about the game, I'm not that interested. You find like a level of depth with the strategy that then you can sort of choose how far into the game you want to go. My problem with League as an esport is, at least except for maybe this Worlds, which had this like very weird sort of like individuals like ruled the game and it was very exciting. The problem over the last few years is just understanding the context of what teams are doing with like their comp and the macro aspects. It's fucking tough, mate. I mean, I've watched a lot of League of Legends and I didn't always understand some of those aspects, and I had to kind of just say, if someone like Kelsey tells me I'm wrong, that fair enough, you might be right there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
so it's kind of an apples to oranges example I'm kind of saying there,
Look, I think it's interesting to think about that. One of the questions that I'll pose to you is like, Thorn, do you watch American?
Well, here's the funny thing. I do actually. Like, I actually don't watch soccer. I watch NFL.
Okay, so like, let's take the NFL.
I'm a rare example, obviously, but yeah, go on.
So I think it's interesting because when you think about like how easy player.
Oh, wait there a second. I've noticed, by the way, we should have probably told this earlier, but I think like your wire's a little bit loose on the connection. So every now and then it cuts a word or two out. So the main thing is it's working okay now, but I think if you ever lean forwards, then it cuts more. So just sit roughly in the same spot.
Okay. Is this okay now?
Yeah, it sounds fine now.
Okay. So, I think like any sport, football is a really intricate game, right? So you may watch a play in football and you may only see the running back run up the middle.
Yes.
But if you were on either the offense, defensive side, and you were in the coaching room the next day, they could spend 30 minutes on one play dissecting, blocking of your left tackle dropping down and blocking the linebacker coming. It's very intricate. So for me, I view esports, depending upon what the game is, are you able to consume it at what level? Like, because there are people who will watch an NFL game and while they're watching are able to dissect, oh my God, that block by the fullback was insane. Mm-hmm. And then there are people that are just like, wow, he caught that long pass, and that's what they're able to ingest. And I think that there are entertaining aspects of both.
Of course,
so I think that some games have to be much more intimately and intricately known. Like, for example, Overwatch, as a casual fan, Overwatch, I think, is harder to consume than, say, League of Legends is as a casual fan.
It's very hard, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and in League, it's super difficult because you're not going to know how many champions are there, 100 and something, and 4 abilities, whatever that factorial is of what everything is moving around and all the different projectiles and magics and this, that, and the other. But directionally, you still know what's going on. So I just think something like Counter-Strike is just more easily digestible than League is more easily digestible than, say, Overwatch. Yeah. But it's a cool conversation. But where do you think the balance lies, though? So like if you're a game developer, like, because for me, Overwatch is an incredible game. I love playing Overwatch. I think it's fun. But some people are saying it's hard to watch. So like if you're a game developer, what ultimately do you think is the right balance?
Well, that's always the $1 million question. And unfortunately, this sounds like a cop-out, but just as someone who has seen every big esports game that's ever been, I have never seen a single one where even when an esport was like, it had the esports component specifically developed, it's not like the old days where they just tacked on the multiplayer to a single-player game, Even when they tried to craft the esports side, no one really knows how it's going to turn out because obviously you're just taking something that you and a bunch of people had an idea of what you're going to do with, and then other people can do what they want with it. So they can find exploits and they can fuck everything up and they can play the game, as you've seen in competitive many times, completely differently to how you designed it in solo queue. Like they do something with a role that just changes the entire game. So the problem there is, I actually think the one thing you can't do is reverse engineer esports success. So instead, for me, if you're a game dev, what you have to do, at least at the moment, is just concentrate on getting a good game that people casually want to play. Then you do your best to make it an esport, and then a lot of that's luck, I have to say, because as I've outlined before, the games that actually had a lot of players, games like Overwatch, League of Legends, they had a harder time getting the conversion to the fan side of it. Whereas, for example, as much as Counter-Strike is watched, it will probably never get close to the number of players that League of Legends has. I mean, even if it ended up with more viewers, which obviously is impossible with China, but even if it ended up with more, it would be one of those rare games that was the opposite way, it had a ratio that was even better than the game playing. But that doesn't mean everyone wants to play Counter-Strike. Maybe it's not as fun a casual game. So at the moment, like, I know what you mean. You want to kind of balance for both, but a part of the problem as well is they're almost opposite things you're balancing for. Like the things that make a casual person who isn't hardcore in the game enjoy the game are very different from what the fan who watches it. Like to give your NFL example there, one of the reasons why the NFL was actually the last big American sport I ever got into is precisely because if I watched the NBA or the NHL are the best examples, I could instantly get the Counter-Strike feeling of like, okay, I can already kind of get something exciting here. Like this is cool when the guy makes a shot. That's amazing when he skates around him and puts it in. Whereas when I would watch the NFL game, part of the problem is, as someone who's studied games enough to know, like sort of know what I don't know, as you say, I would start watching, and even as I was enjoying as a player, like, oh, what a sick run by the running back where he got through that gap there, I started to realize, yeah, but I don't understand what was the defensive assignment that made that blocking so he could even get that gap. It's not like he knew that gap was there. He had to see it in the moment, So,
sure.
And actually, they famously say about the NFL, it's very true if you watched it enough. Like the reason why it's a genius that it took off as a big game is because everyone really does just watch the quarterback and the wide receiver and the running back. You just ignore the defender until he defends. But the irony of the game is defense in that game is probably the number one factor in winning the game. And most of the battles are actually won by the guys you don't watch. It's the guy who did an amazing block 100%. On like Aaron Donald that meant you didn't get sacked. That actually wins you the game. Because, there's a great saying they say, which is like, the reason why defense is so amazing in those sports is because, like, if you stop a guy 4 times, but then the 5th time he makes the breakaway and scores the touchdown, you did an amazing job, but it doesn't look like it on the scoreboard. So as a result, the team, see what I mean? The level of nuance is ridiculous. So again, like you say with Overwatch, I've watched quite a lot of Overwatch in the Overwatch League. I would say that is the game that is still the hardest to understand. I mean, in their case, they're the ultimate example, I think, of what you said, which is they made an amazing casual game. It's very fun to play casually, but I actually think it's almost impossible to make it as big or as easy to watch as some of the other esports games. Because, for example, there isn't a one ball to watch. There's every player. And again,
sure. And there's also so many different modes, right? Payload moving, capture,
exactly. Which, remember, if you're a casual fan, that's a great way to keep you interested. That's a great way to keep the spice. But the problem is, again, as an actual professional mode, well, if CSGO had 3 different modes, Call of Duty is the good example, right? Call of Duty does have all these different modes. It makes it harder to follow. It makes it harder to know who the best team is, or it makes it weirder as to how you build the team. Like, the problem is, I actually kind of feel, as I said, the simplest way to solve it is game developers just make great games, and then everyone else will have to figure out the other side of it.
Yeah, one thing I'll say, and then Loco, we'll let you move it on to another question. Overwatch, though, from where they started day one to where now is significantly better with all the viewability tools that they're doing, and then they're also introducing bullshit this year with respect to allowing people to view Overwatch through a single player. So, like, the way that you can watch the Overwatch League, watching it as if you're playing the game, so your first-person view of a singular hero, I think will also be pretty cool and really helpful.
I worked a little bit in game development, and whenever someone talked about esports, like our CEO or COO would say, don't worry about making it an esport, make it a good game, and you might get lucky and it turns into an esport. No one can really build an esport, and I think there's so much truth in that. Like, you can't build an esport. Like, you need an audience, like, you need people that are super dedicated to it, and more so ever, like, you're just building a great game than actually trying to build an esport.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, okay, let's do final question for Ben, and then, we can start wrapping up. Ben, ideally, where is Misfits as a brand in 5 years? Still investing heavily in the LEC?
Yeah, absolutely.
Weird question.
Well, I'm more curious about where Misfits as a brand is in 5 years. That's the more important part.
Sorry to be moving. I'll stay still. I want people to be and talking about Misfits in the same breath that we talk about G2 and Fnatic right now, in the same way that you talk about, say, TSM, Cloud9, and Liquid in NA. It's building a brand that has bite. It's gathering a community. I think, again, if you rally around the name of our team of Misfits, where we are all Misfits in our own ways, and creating a real sense of community around that team and supporting a team through ups and downs. For us, with what we have in place now for the next 2 to 3 years on our roster side, is going to be continue to push hard to win, because winning never hurts. It's just continue to invest in the team, in the content, in the infrastructure, and in everything that we're doing.
Okay. All right. Well, Ben, it was so great to have you on the show. Thank you for answering all the tough questions and dealing with Storin's banter. Do you have any final words before we end the show?
No, just appreciate being on here, and hopefully people learn a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, because you see and you read press releases and you hear things, but really the story about how rosters are built is not kind of well known, and for us, again, it was having Steven as our anchor, convincing Maxlor to come on board was the first domino, and from Maxlor we had FEBIVEN with Clutch, and obviously thanks Loco, you talked about your involvement in Gorilla with some of the translating at the end was super helpful, and we're stoked for 2019. I think both of our titles and brands. I mean, with Misfits and Mayhem, and don't sleep on some of the growth that we're having in Fortnite with Skeptic. And this is a kid that
just keep it in esports though. Keep it on esports.
That was another easy one. But yeah, look, we're excited for next year. We're ready to kick ass, and we're ready to do some, pushing the meta, as we like to say. And Thorn, look out for those cheesy taglines that are going to be coming your way starting in January. Yeah. We will at you on them, and then we'll get a tattoo for you, temporary tattoo. And yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Well, dude, actually, one thing that I think is also, like, as a small side tangent to that, as a good ending point, is like one area that a lot of people missed out on in branding is that memes aren't just like jokes, etc. Like, you want something that's catchy in that particular way. And in fact, sometimes even if people meme on you, they're inadvertently spreading your brand. It can actually work out for you, especially as, for example, the best example ever, right, is think about how long the whole like Team Liquid fourth meme was like an albatross around their neck. It was like, oh, that's like a way people... Now when people say it, it makes Team Liquid look fucking awesome because they're the opposite of the fourth place team. The Doublelift one, I always said this, whoever the guy was who obviously clearly hated Doublelift, who made that like subreddit like Doublelift's trophy cabinet, joke is on you, homie. Like, you have just literally like set yourself up to get wrecked, because that's like, he's got the most full trophy cabinet of almost any NA player ever to play in like a League of Legends, basically. So memes are powerful, dude. Yeah. You've got to enter the memosphere and do battle.
What did you just say? The memosphere?
If I ever join a big company, I will be called Chief Meme Officer. Like, that will be like Chief Memetic Officer. That will be my title.
The memosphere Chief Memetic Officer. Dude, you're on a fucking roll right now. You're on a roll.
Exactly.
Right. Should we end that on that, gentlemen?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Cool.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.